Hey guys, welcome back to my channel and thank you for watching this video. So today I want to just do a quick video talking to you about the types of records you can research when you're starting your African American genealogy journey. Now, you may see me glance down to the side because I have some notes down here that I want to reference as I go over these records. But yeah, this is just going to be a quick video of me chatting with you about like I said, the type of records, because I think we assume that everybody knows the types of records that are available, and the reality is people don't know all the records that are available. So I don't know why we make that assumption. And so I just wanted to, yeah, just sit down and just kind of go over the most common type of records that you can find. There are tons of records out there, but there are some that are more common than others. And do a little bit of talking about where you can find some of the records. So let's talk about the most obvious records, and those are United States federal census records. These records are probably the first place people research when they're looking for records about their ancestors. And it doesn't matter if you have African American ancestry or whatever your ancestry is, people start with census records, as you should, because they're the most organized and the most accessible records that you can find. So just so you know, the United States federal census is taken every 10 years. States also have census records. I don't know if everybody knows this, but most states have their own census um, record, basically, and they are usually every 10 years as well, although when you get a little bit further back, you can find some states took records on an odd year. So it just kind of depends on your area or your state. But if you are researching your family history, don't overlook census state records, because or state census records, because they can be available for certain states, and it just kind of depends on the state, the frequency, and where they were taken. You never know. I have run across some great information on state census records that I didn't necessarily find in the federal census records. I've also run across state census records that were like every 5 years or every 15 years. So the cadence is a little bit different than federal census records. It's just all over the place. But what I will say to you about census records is there are many more census records available than just the United States federal census records, although those are the main ones people look at. But don't underestimate your state having census records that you can dive into. Even sometimes cities had census records. I've run across that too, believe it or not. So census records is one of the most common form of records that people research. Another type of record are or is a marriage certificate, right? So you can look at marriage records. Usually those are kept by the state and county. And primarily by the county, if I'm being honest with you. So it's very important to know location. I've done a couple of videos talking about the importance of knowing locations for your ancestors, because those type of records, if you don't have any idea of where they were living, you're never going to find a decent marriage record for them. But marriage records are available. There are some databases that are available online through sites like Ancestry.com, FamilySearch.org, where you can research marriage records. And I love marriage records because marriage records give you information that came directly from your ancestor, because that's how you get a marriage certificate, right? You have to show up at the courthouse, fill out an application. You have to fill it out. You have to put that information in: your age, your height, your weight, your race, your parents, your spouse's information. You have to give that information to the court. So it's one of the best ways to get confirmed information about your ancestors, right? Each county is slightly different. Each state is slightly different about what they collect and what they keep and how long they keep it and all that good stuff. But marriage records is a great source for information about your ancestors. Death records is another good source. I won't go into all the details around death records. You know, probably the type of information that's on a death record, right? Name, age, date of birth, reason of death, date of death, things like that. The only caution I will tell you about a death record, and this is something a lot of people don't mention for some reason, but that is, obviously the person who died is not the person giving you the information on the death record, you guys. So you have to think about that when you see death record information. If you are looking at a death certificate for your ancestor, let's say your great 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 grandfather, well, your great 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 grandfather is not the one who gave that information on the death certificate, okay, because they're dead. So somebody else had to give the information. And depending on who that somebody else was, that is what's going to determine how accurate that information is. So be careful with death certificate information because it's not always as accurate as you think. Especially in the African American community with ancestors who may have been born during slavery and maybe they died in the early 20th century. The person giving the information may not have any idea of where they were even born, who their parents were. The person who died may not have any idea of who their parents were, especially if they were born during slavery. But even later, like in 1950s, you see people on the census records in 1950s, and you go back and you try to find a death certificate for that person. You know, if they died and they didn't have any close relatives, it could be a neighbor giving that information to a death to whoever they give it to the court, coroner, whoever. It could be somebody in the church. It may not be somebody close to that person who knew their personal information. So just be aware of that when you're looking at death certificates. Military records. Military records is another great source of information. We have a wealth of military records available in the U.S., and African Americans have a long history with the military and serving in the military. So don't overlook military records. Most of their records are available in the general databases that you can find, like on Ancestry.com, FamilySearch.org, especially World War II records, like World War I, World War II. Those records is a ton of those records. And honestly, if you had an ancestor living during that time, it's a high possibility that they served in one of those world wars. So make sure that you don't overlook military records. It's a great way to get information about your ancestors. Usually what you find on there is information about their residence, like where were they living, their age, their height, their personal demographic information, because that's the type of stuff that you're going to want to know, right? In the military, are you sick? Do you have any scars? How tall are you? Can you see? Can you read? Can you write? Because they need to make sure you're fit to be a soldier. So that's the type of stuff they're going to ask. Who's your next relative? Who's your next of kin? Stuff like that. Because if something happens to you, they need to know who to notify. They need to know where to send those notifications. So it's a great way to get some information that you may not find in other documentation about your ancestors. So definitely don't give up on the military records. And then finally, I will just say court records in general, probate records, land records, wills, all of that. Those are just great records to get information that you typically don't see on a census. And so when you're trying to build the story of your ancestor, sometimes court records really help you build out that story. So make sure that you give those court records a search as well. And most of these records are available online in today's world. So you can make sure that you take a look at those records. And so about access, let me wrap up this video with two things. One, access. Look, I'm just be real with you. To have the cleanest access to these records and databases, you're probably going to have to pay some type of fee. And the most common service that gives you access to these records is Ancestry.com. They offer a lot of free trials though, so it's a great way for you to get your feet wet and see if it's something that you're really interested in. And they can be very affordable on their monthly subscriptions. They can also be very expensive. So you just need to kind of choose what works for you. There are some free options. FamilySearch.org traditionally has been free. They do have some paid services now. I don't know how long they're going to stay free. But I would call them more freemium at this point than completely free, but it's definitely a lot more accessible than Ancestry.com. I will have both of those linked down below. If I can find a free trial for Ancestry, I'll share it. Can you go through and find these records on your own? Yes, but the inconvenience of doing that is probably going to be a barrier that you may not want to face, right? Let's talk about court records, for example. You can go to your local courthouse and go through their court books and go through every court book they have, because they do have research hours available and they're public and you don't have to pay anything. But if you don't know the specific day, time, year, whatever of your ancestor, you're probably not going to find anything just looking through random books. The benefit of using like an Ancestry or a FamilySearch.org is that many of those records have been digitized and you can search via name. And so instead of having to make a special trip to the courthouse, you can generally search within minutes and see what you can find. I could do a whole video on pros and cons of Ancestry.com and FamilySearch.org because I am, a trained librarian. So you can imagine that I have a very specific opinion about it. But for the purposes of this video, I'm just being upfront with you. When you start diving into your family history, you're going to want to need access to some of these online databases. You just can't really avoid it. So that's what I want to say. The next thing I want to point out before closing this video is accessibility of records for privacy reasons. So we have a privacy standard in the US where records of a certain age are not considered publicly available because we have to wait till that privacy window goes by. I think it's still 76 years. So after a certain period of time, records are considered public and they can be searched, easily searched. Now, what does that mean for you? It means if you're trying to look at somebody's marriage record from 2024, you're probably not going to be able to do it because that's protected under privacy, right? You just can't go pull anybody's marriage record just because you want to. However, marriage records from 1920 is kind of like open field. Anybody can see anything there, right? So that's kind of, and that's just a very simple example, but that's just kind of, how you'll run into it when you're doing genealogy. I think a more realistic example may be, let's say you want to get information about your parents. I run across this a lot. People reaching out wanting to find information about their parents, but their parents were born in 1980. Okay, well, there's going to be very limited public information about your parents' personal life because it's still protected under the privacy laws. And I think a lot of people don't understand that, right? But when I used to do research consultations, I probably 80% of my consultation requests were about finding information about people that fell within those privacy protections. And I'm limited on what I can find. Anybody is limited on what I can find. That's when you have to do something else, like use a private investigator or something else. But that's not genealogy research, okay? So keep that in mind when you're researching your family history. If you're looking for information about current ancestors or people who are still living, definitely people who are still living, you're not going to be able to you just can't get private information about people who are still living, you guys. So keep that in mind when you're looking at records. Genealogy research is historical research. It is not current research. That's a different thing. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox, my librarian soapbox off of that, you guys. But I hope you found this video helpful. Just a basic intro to the type of records that are out there. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a happy time researching your family history.